Well, thank you. My name is Jeff, and I am a compulsive eater, overeater. I do take my food directly off the gray sheet. I write it down. I call it into my sponsor. Actually, I call it in the night before. And then the following day, that's exactly what I eat, nothing more, nothing less. I have three great meals every day. Um, so I grew up in upstate New York on the banks of the Hudson River. My great grandfather came through Ellis Island from Ireland and went upstream and opened it turned out to be three small grocery stores with the family name, where he put his six sons to work. Good Irish family. I was one of the fourth generation to work in what we refer to as the markets. Every day after kindergarten, I spent afternoons working at the Second Avenue Market, was just a block and a half from where I lived. And I was put to work as a 5-year-old. I thought I had a job. I was sweeping, cleaning windows, taking an Irish starch and taking it from the large 50-pound sacks they came in and packaged it into 5 and 10-pound sacks. And I got to work and be mentored by my grandfather and my great uncle. Taught some really bad language along the way, which I learned not to take that home. But like any good family business, I thought I had a job because I was being paid. It was 15 cents an hour. This is many, many decades ago. It was really daycare. But like a good family business, I was paid cash on Fridays. And once I was old enough, and I think I must have been 6 or 7 when the very busy Main Street in just north of Albany, a little town called Lansingburg. It's really part of Troy, New York. Busy street, cobblestones, dangerous back then. And so once I was old enough to cross myself, which when I realized I must have been, because I asked my uncle, who had a real attitude about him, quite a guy, I said, cross me. And he gave me one of those. And I realized, oh, okay. So I learned how to cross the street without getting run over, and here I am. But with that freedom came with, on Fridays, my pocket full of nickels, dimes, and quarters. I made my way across 112th Street to Pete's Corner Store, where I indulged in, spent a little bit of my earnings and bought a cylindrical item. And not the mini one, not the great big one, but the kind of in between size one. And knowing, with 2 little brothers at home, if I took that home, I would have to share it. And so I headed to a secret place along the Hudson, right on the banks, and I would enjoy that addiction, which I didn't know, in secret. And then I'd go on home, and like good Catholic families, mom served fish on Fridays. That's what was called for. But since I had taken the edge off my hunger in a big way, I only poked at dinner, and mom went to her grave thinking that I just didn't like fish. And I really wish I could tell her, Mom, it wasn't the fish, and really tell her what was going on. But I think she even appealed to the priest that maybe we could have a special exemption for this oldest son who was unable to manage to eat fish, and maybe get him a hamburger, which I think she did have that conversation, but the priests at St. Augustine's were pretty resolute in their program. So now I know, like many, many, many years later, that having a secret around food is a real marker for an unhealthy relationship with food. Didn't know it at the time. Thought I was just protecting myself from my little brothers. But then later, fast forward to my mid-30s, I learned a lot more about addiction in the 12 steps. I was invited to a family members treatment center family week, and it was a 30-day program. And the idea was you come to family week. It was up in Ohio. It was really a well-run program. But they made every family member pledge for family week not to smoke or drink. I never smoked. And my drinking hadn't progressed to a daily thing. So it was no big deal for me to put as I say, the plug in the jug. That's frankly pretty easy, or it was for me at the time. They wanted us to listen, to learn, to feel our feelings is what I now realize what they were doing. And so I agreed, and I haven't had a drink since. Still sober many years later. My family member is always going to have 3 weeks advance sobriety on me, and I hope I never get ahead of that, which would mean a calamity in our family. But I didn't find really putting a plug in the jug that hard. But my food addiction was gaining ground on me all the time. My attempts were, even though I slipstream behind this family member who used all kinds of programs we hear about here that generally don't succeed, I tried something a little different. Even before my experience with AA, I had tried willpower, just plain old Irish, come on, I can do this. To get over my obsession with food. And at the time, my patron saint of willpower was a fellow Irishman, G. Gordon Liddy. A lot of you here are probably way too young to know who that was, but he wrote a book about will. He called it Will for willpower, and I admired him for what he wrote in that book. It wasn't his role in Watergate, but for how he overcame his fears and the things that were scary in his life by confronting them. He faced them down. So after I read the book, I thought, hey, maybe that's the way to go. So I bought this particular X food that had me at the time. I was buying by the multiples out of a vending machine not far from where my desk was at work. And so I took one of those and said, let me see if I can make this thing work for me. So I put it right on my pencil set in a prominent position on my desk and I stared at it and thought, okay, let me see if I can resist this. And it kind of worked. I still wanted it. The compulsion didn't go away, but it increased my ability to resist it. And it stayed on that desk for quite some time. I'm pretty sure it was probably petrified when I finally ditched it, when I moved on to a different role in the company. And so I just invoked what I'd learned from Mr. Liddy. Worked for a long time, long enough that I thought, well, I'm good. But then it turned out I really wasn't. It little by little, X foods crept back in. I resorted to food whenever things got like really good news. That was an opportunity, or maybe bad news, or just too stressful or too joyous. It really, in retrospect, helps me understand what the nature of my food compulsion is, and that's any emotion, up or down, was an occasion for me to eat. And then I had another experience. So now I'm jumping around in a timeline here, but with my AA experience and working the steps regarding through Al-Anon and then AA, I knew the steps, but I was still struggling with my food. And I used to think that maybe because I was somewhat special, right, being the oldest of an oldest of an oldest of an oldest, that I was a little more special. So I kept my supply of X food chilled when most people wouldn't. And I remember standing in front of the fridge one day, and these X foods were screaming my name. And I had my hand on the fridge, and I thought, well, maybe I'll try something different. And I really wanted to resist. I just didn't want to be pulled into it again, because the feelings were spiraling down. And without a lot of thought, just this idea bolted into my head, and probably without the AA experience, I wouldn't have thought this, but I thought, I just said it out loud, I need to ask for help. And so I said out loud, Lord, please lift my desire to eat this X. And right there, it was like magic. It was the most amazing thing. Could have been harps and fireworks, but there weren't. It was just quiet. And I was still standing there in front of the fridge. My hand wasn't on the handle any longer. And I just no longer had the urge to devour this drug. It was my drug. It was almost like, even though I didn't think through it this way, it was almost like a spontaneous seventh step, which I don't think would have worked hadn't I done my earlier step work. in the seventh step, I humbly asked him to remove my shortcomings. But you got to be careful for what you ask for, because I'm not sure I know I wasn't really ready. I hadn't done a solid sixth step, being ready to let go of those things before you ask for the obsession to be lifted.
5 minutes.
Thank you, Ben. And so some years after that, I did find GreySheet here in Austin. I got to GreySheet via OA, like many of you have. I did well. I followed the program, had a good sponsor, did exactly what he told me and she told me. I had a couple different sponsors that helped. And I figured out I could experience and deal with the feelings that I'd been stuffing for so long. Life was generally good, but then I decided I had a desire to go off on an off-the-grid adventure. And I, for the life of me, could not figure out how to carry all the food I'd need to go off for a good number of days, totally away from civilization and my kitchen and refrigerators and everything else you need. And so, especially the cooked vegetables and salads. So I decided, I didn't slip. It was a thoughtful, stupid, but thoughtful action. And I strode away consciously thinking, I'll just do this adventure and come right back. Well, that was over 20 years ago. I am back and have been continuous abstinent since August 11th. I do want to thank, I came back for all the right reasons. It was time, but I also want to thank the veteran GreySheeters who've done so much work, obviously for themselves, but really work they selflessly put into this program on committees where, and I don't know who did this, but I owe them a big hug for creating this thing called a flex loaf. And it's a way for me not to be chained to my kitchen. And it's made all the difference for me. So to have something that's totally abstinent, compact, portable, lets me live the life I thought wasn't possible. So what's it like now? Now that my food is a fuel, it's not a thick bandage over the wounds of my life. Feelings, for one thing, I feel them and I experience them and I have them in the present. I am living in the present. I'm not bundling up these feelings and accumulating them, turning them into resentments that are just hurtful to me and certainly everybody around me. Freedom, I appreciate that this is a bizarre thing. It's the magic. It's counterintuitive that to get what I want, I had to give up control and complete surrender. And I've accepted I am not in charge of my food. Each day I surrender once again as I do my ritual. It's a very critical ritual to my day of writing down my food, committed to my sponsor. And then that simple act has freed me of the tyranny of food. And I really appreciate my sponsor. She helped me get started right, work with my own uniquenesses that I like to move around and do things and camp. And she's always been there to help me. And I have to tell you, that's been incredible. And through GreySheet, I've been able to be abstinent. And I've car camped over a month worth of days, traveling around. And if you've got a cooler and a car and a scale, you can stay abstinent. That's kind of straightforward. I've flown to Great Britain, stayed abstinent. My Great Britain sponsor knows who she is. She was my temporary same time zone food sponsor and had several backups also in England. And I'm pretty sure now with the Flex Loaf, I could carry the abstinent food I need to do an off the grid hike for 5 days. And I'm even thinking about maybe some longer adventures in a canoe because you can carry a lot more gear. And with a Yeti in the canoe with me, I think I could do some pretty cool long off the grid adventures. Not the big hairy thing. It's a cooler called a Yeti. So with that, thank you for letting me share. I've enjoyed learning and listening and being an observer on this meeting and the meetings I attend through the week. But thank you very much, and I will pass.